They never knew the sky could kill them. That's the line that always floats back into my head when I think about the end of the dinosaurs. Because for over 150 million years, these creatures ruled the earth. They were the landlords, the tenants, and the noisy neighbors stomping around in the middle of the night. And then one random Tuesday afternoon, give or take a few million years, everything they built their world on was gone. Tonight we're gliding into that strange moment in deep time. The last day of the dinosaurs, the day the sky itself fell. So dim the lights. Get comfortable, let the blankets wrap around you, and while you're drifting into that half-sleep state, leave a little note in the comments below. Tell me where you're listening from. Are you tucked into bed in New York? Sneaking a listen at work in London? Stretched out on a sofa in Mumbai? Or maybe sitting up way too late in some small town where the biggest predator you'll see tonight is a raccoon raiding your trash can? Wherever you are, welcome to the end of the Cretaceous. Let's imagine this together. You wake up in a world that doesn't know it's about to end. The air is heavy with humidity. Dragonflies as big as your hand drift lazily through the ferns, and herds of hadrosaurs move slowly toward a watering hole. The ground trembles slightly under the weight of a tyrannosaurus pushing through the trees. Birds are chattering in the canopy because, yes, birds were already around. Their great-great-grandparents still feathered little dinosaurs, and all of it feels eternal, timeless. Like this is how the world has always been and will always be. But then you tilt your head to the horizon, and somewhere above the clouds, a rock the size of a city is screaming toward Earth at 20 kilometers a second, faster than any bullet, brighter than any fire. Nobody knows it's coming, and that's the irony. We do, but they didn't. This wasn't some slow decline, not a graceful fading out. It was a single catastrophic day, a day where everything changed. And before we get lost in firestorms and tidal waves, let's glide gently into the setting. The late Cretaceous was lush, warm, sticky with tropical swamps and flowering plants just beginning to conquer the world. North America alone looked like two continents split by an inland sea, with tyrannosaurs prowling on one side and horned ceratopsians on the other. Imagine plains filled with triceratops, pachycephalosaurs headbutting like drunk teenagers, and flocks of pterosaurs soaring over it all. The planet was alive, buzzing, overgrown. And it had no idea it was living on borrowed time. Archaeologists love to call this deep time, which sounds poetic but basically means a clock so slow it makes our lives look like static. And yet, sometimes deep time gets interrupted, violently, rudely, like a cosmic alarm clock that no one set. That alarm rang 66 million years ago, when an asteroid about 10 kilometers wide, that's roughly Mount Everest deciding it wanted to go sightseeing, slammed into what's now the Yucatan Peninsula. 1 second, dinosaurs were squabbling over territory, and the next second, the entire Gulf of Mexico had a new crater in it, 180 kilometers wide and 20 kilometers deep. Let's pause here, because if you've ever dropped a stone into water and watched the ripples, imagine that. But the stone is 10 kilometers wide, and the pond is the earth. You tilt your face upward, and the late Cretaceous sun feels warm on your skin, but somewhere high above, brighter than the sun itself, the asteroid cuts through the atmosphere like a blade through silk. At 20 kilometers a second, the air doesn't just move out of the way, it explodes. The rock superheats the air in front of it, creating a trail of plasma that streaks brighter than any comet. If you had eyes sharp enough, you would see it stretch across the sky like a burning scar. Birds, the small feathered descendants of dinosaurs, erupt out of the trees in panic. A herd of triceratops raises its heads from the ferns, their frills glinting in the sunlight, instinctively uneasy, though they have no idea why. A tyrannosaurus roars in the distance, annoyed at something unseen. Its sound rolls through the forest like thunder. But compared to what's coming, it's just background noise. Then, silence for a beat. And the world ends. The asteroid slams into the shallow waters of what's now the Yucatan, instantly vaporizing rock, ocean, and itself. The energy release is equivalent to billions of Hiroshima bombs. For a moment, the sea is gone, blasted upward into a fireball of superheated steam and molten stone. The shock wave radiates out at hypersonic speed, flattening everything in its path. Trees, ferns, entire herds of animals are tossed like twigs. Within seconds, the coastline around the Gulf of Mexico is annihilated. But that's just the opening act. The impact carves a crater nearly 200 kilometers wide. Its rim collapses. The Earth shudders on its axis. Seismic waves ripple out across continents, triggering earthquakes far away. If you were in what's now Montana or Spain or Africa, you would feel the ground convulsing beneath your feet. Tsunamis tower higher than skyscrapers, racing across the proto-Atlantic, slamming into distant shores days later, carrying debris and carcasses thousands of miles. And then comes the rain, not of water, but of molten rock. The asteroid blasted chunks of Earth into space, and within minutes, they begin falling back, glowing, fiery, turning the sky into an oven. For hours, the surface of the Earth bakes, forests ignite, plains become seas of fire, creatures flee into rivers, burrows, caves, anywhere there's shelter. But for many, there is no shelter deep enough, no water cold enough, no cave strong enough. It's a planet-sized catastrophe playing out in real time. The first few minutes after impact are pure chaos. The asteroid's arrival has already blasted a hole in the Earth's crust nearly 20 kilometers deep. The shockwave tears across the planet faster than sound, flattening forests within 1,000 kilometers. Creatures closest to the impact don't even have time to register what's happening. They're vaporized in the flash. The shallow sea of the Yucatan is boiled off instantly. Corals, fish, marine reptiles, gone in less than a heartbeat. And the air itself turns lethal. Temperatures spike so high that plants thousands of kilometers away ignite without a flame ever touching them. It's called thermal radiation, and it was enough to set entire continents on fire. Imagine looking to the horizon and seeing it glow orange in every direction. Hours later, debris still rains down. Not just dust, but chunks of rock the size of cars, all flung upward by the impact, falling back through the atmosphere like meteors, heating the sky until it glows red. Even sheltered valleys feel like ovens. Herds of hadrosaurs collapse from heat stroke. Pterosaurs plummet from the air, their wings scorched mid-flight. Mammals, tiny shrew-like creatures hiding underground, curl tighter in their burrows as the world above burns. And the sound, if you could call it sound, would be like thunder that never stops, rolling and cracking for hours, shaking the ground and the air until you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. Then comes the darkness, fine dust, ash, and sulfur blasted high into the stratosphere begin to spread across the globe. Within days, sunlight dims, photosynthesis stalls, plants stop growing, the lush Cretaceous forests turn silent. With no plants, herbivores starve. With no herbivores, carnivores starve. The great food web collapses link by link. Even the oceans are poisoned. As the asteroid hit shallow, sulfur-rich rocks, it released chemicals that turned the rain acidic. Rivers carried this poison into the seas, killing plankton, corals, and the small creatures at the bottom of the food chain. Without them, marine reptiles, fish, and giant mosasaurs starved just as surely as triceratops did on land. The fires smolder for weeks. Smoke and soot rise higher than volcanic eruptions. Some scientists call it an impact winter, a period where the Earth's surface temperature plummets. Some models suggest global temperatures fell by as much as 20 degrees Celsius, turning what was a tropical world into something closer to a deep freeze. For creatures used to warmth and abundance, the change is catastrophic. The survivors are those who can hide, endure, and eat almost anything. Small mammals, birds, crocodiles, even turtles hunkering down in mud survive, while the towering dinosaurs, dependent on endless vegetation and open plains, and simply cannot. In the weeks after impact, Earth settles into a strange half-light. The sun is still there, but hidden behind a veil of soot and dust stretching around the globe. Days feel like twilight. Nights are even darker. Temperatures crash. Forests that once steamed with humidity are suddenly brittle and cold. Imagine a triceratops standing in a clearing, confused, nostrils steaming in the chill air, because the world it knew just weeks earlier is gone. The plants suffer first. With so little light, photosynthesis slows to a crawl, then stops. Leaves wither, flowers collapse, fruits never ripen. Even ferns, the weeds of deep time, struggle to hang on. Without plants, The great herds of hadrosaurs and ceratopsians collapse. These animals needed tons of vegetation each day, and now there is nothing. Skeletons pile up along riverbanks, whole herds dying in place. The carnivores last a little longer. Tyrannosaurs, raptors, giant crocodiles, they pick through the carcasses, scavenging what they can. But eventually the bodies run out, and with no new prey to replace them, the predators starve too. It's a chain reaction, toppling one creature after another. The oceans are no refuge. Dust and sulfur from the impact have poisoned the rain. It falls into rivers and seas, turning waters acidic. Plankton die first, microscopic but essential. Without them, fish collapse. Then marine reptiles, the great mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, vanish from the record. Coral reefs bleach and crumble. Entire ocean ecosystems unravel in less than a century. Months turn to years. The atmosphere is still dim, but slowly, particles begin to settle. Rain clears the skies a little at a time. Greenery makes a cautious return. First mosses, then ferns, pushing through ash-covered soil. Here and there, life begins again. But by now, the age of dinosaurs is over. The giants are gone. The world belongs to the small, mammals, birds, insects, crocodiles lurking in muddy rivers, survivors that could hide, endure, and wait out the darkness. 66 million years later, we're left with fossils, shadows of once dominant creatures, and the strange knowledge that a single day, a single impact, could undo 150 million years of evolutionary success. The first years after the impact were bleak. Ash still blanketed the land. Forests were gone. Rivers ran choked with silt and dead things. But life has always had a strange habit of returning. Even in the darkest times, it began small, very small. Mosses and lichens creeping across the burned earth, spores drifting through the air, ferns, always the first pioneers, sprouting in ash like little green flags of resilience. Scientists call it the fern spike, a sudden, overwhelming presence of ferns in the fossil record just after the impact. They were weeds of deep time, stubborn, opportunistic, quick to take over where forests had fallen. And with plants came the creatures that could make use of them. Insects returned quickly, beetles, ants and termites chewing through dead wood and new growth, tiny mammals scurrying among the ferns, birds pecking at seeds, crocodiles still lurking in muddy pools. In a world stripped of giants, the small survived because the small needed less. Mammals in particular began to change. For over 100 million years, they had lived in the shadows, tiny, nocturnal, often no larger than a rat. They crept through underbrush, hid in burrows, stole eggs from nests. But now, with dinosaurs gone, there was room, space to expand. Some mammals grew larger, some specialized, others diversified into every niche left behind, and slowly, step by step, they began writing the next chapter of Earth's story. It didn't happen overnight. The darkness from the impact lasted maybe a decade. Recovery took centuries, and ecosystems needed millions of years to rebuild. But from the ashes of the Cretaceous, new forests grew, new rivers carved their way through stone, and new species began to dominate. One of the most striking survivors were the birds, fragile yet adaptable, descendants of small feathered dinosaurs. They inherited the skies. While pterosaurs vanished, birds thrived, feeding on seeds and insects that rebounded quickly. Every time you see a sparrow or a crow today, you're looking at a living reminder of the age of dinosaurs. And perhaps the strangest twist of all is that without that asteroid, we wouldn't be here. Mammals might never have had the chance to flourish. Dinosaurs could still dominate the planet, and primates might never have risen in the forests that followed. Our entire existence rests on the absence of those giants. So the last day of the dinosaurs wasn't just an ending, it was also the opening act of something new. A reset button on the story of life, one that cleared the stage and handed it to creatures that once hid in the shadows. As centuries turned to millennia, Earth became green again, forests spread, oceans settled, skies cleared. And though the tyrannosaurs and triceratops were gone, their legacy remained in stone and in the birds that still sing today. So when we look back at that one day, 66 million years ago, when the sky fell and the ground shook, we aren't just looking at destruction. We're looking at the strange, fragile chain of events that eventually led to us, sitting here, drifting into sleep, telling stories under the same stars that once shone on dinosaurs. Picture the landscape a few 100,000 years after the asteroid. The forests are growing back. Ferns have given way to new flowering plants. The skies are filled with birds. And on the ground, mammals are beginning to experiment with being something more than snacks for dinosaurs. At first, they were small, mouse-sized insect eaters, burrowers, climbers. They scurried between roots, gnawed on seeds, darted from shadows. But now, the shadows were emptier. The great predators were gone, and the stage was wide open. And so mammals began to scale up. Some stayed small and clever, others bulked up. Within a few million years, we start seeing dog-sized herbivores, cat-sized hunters, even pig-like creatures grazing on soft shoots. They were clumsy experiments, nature trying out every possibility, as if evolution had suddenly been handed a blank page and a box of crayons. By about 10 million years after the impact, mammals had become diverse enough to fill almost every niche the dinosaurs once held. Some took to the water and became the ancestors of whales. Others grew into hoofed grazers, the great-great-grandparents of deer, horses, and antelope. Predators sharpened their teeth and claws from tiny weasel-like creatures that would one day become cats. to larger hounds and bear-like beasts. And then came the oddballs. For a time, the planet was ruled by creatures you'd barely recognize today. Enormous flightless birds with beaks like axes stalked the plains. Terror birds that hunted smaller mammals, while sloth-like giants the size of trucks lumbered through the forests. Saber-toothed relatives with oversized teeth prowled river valleys. It was, in a sense, a second age of giants. Not quite dinosaurs, but mammals stretching their legs, testing the limits of what was possible. Some succeeded, others died out quickly. But the pattern was clear. Mammals were no longer hiding. They were the new landlords of Earth. And here's the irony. Many of these new giants vanished long before humans ever saw them. Entire families of strange beasts came and went in silence. Their bones are all we have left, a fossilized record of a chaotic, inventive period of Earth's history. But while most species came and went, one small group of primates quietly began its own experiment, living in trees, eating fruit, forming groups, and eventually, after millions of years of patient evolution, they would walk upright, make tools, and wonder about their place in the story. That's us. Imagine the Earth around 2 million years ago. The continents look almost familiar now. The climate swings wildly between ice ages and warmer intervals. And everywhere you look, there are oversized mammals, megafauna as we call them today. The stars of this age were the mammoths, shaggy elephants with sweeping tusks that curved like ivory crescents across the tundra. They grazed on endless steppe grasslands, moving in herds so large that the ground trembled beneath their weight. Some species grew taller than a double-decker bus. Their bones and tusks still turn up in Siberia, preserved in frozen soil like relics of another world. Beside them wandered mastodons, shorter, stockier cousins with straighter tusks. They preferred forests to grasslands, pulling down branches and stripping bark from trees. Different habitats, but the same prehistoric majesty. And of course, predators followed, saber-toothed cats or smilodon with fangs as long as your hand. They weren't fast sprinters like modern lions. Instead, they relied on ambush, heavy muscles, and those iconic teeth to bring down bison or juvenile mammoths. Imagine the eerie sight. A cat crouched in tall grass, jaws gaping impossibly wide, then springing forward in one silent, brutal leap. But cats weren't the only danger. There were giant bears, dire wolves with packs stronger than any seen today, and short-faced bears that stood taller than a man even on all fours. Some scientists think these bears could sprint faster than a horse, which is a terrifying thought to fall asleep to. Though, thankfully, you're safe in bed tonight. Meanwhile, in South America, sloths the size of elephants lumbered across plains. Armored glyptodons, relatives of armadillos, shuffled like walking tanks, covered in bony shells. Terror birds, still lingering in some regions, patrolled like prehistoric ostriches with attitude. It was, in many ways, a second act of grandeur, a world full of strange, oversized animals that seemed designed to impress. But this time, the ending came not from an asteroid, but from a smaller, clever predator who carried fire and spears, humans. As Ice Age climates shifted and human hunters spread across the globe, megafauna populations began to thin. Mammoths dwindled first on the mainland, then survived only on small islands like Wrangel Island off Siberia, where a tiny remnant clung on until just 4,000 years ago. Saber-tooths vanished, giant sloths fell, and the age of giants faded into memory. And yet, we still live with their shadows. Elephants carry the echo of mammoths. Big cats trace their ancestry to saber-tooths. Even the domesticated dog is a distant echo of those dire wolf packs. The world we know is haunted by their ghosts. Picture the first humans stepping into new continents, their fires small and flickering against the dark, the air sharp with frost, the ground echoing with the heavy footfalls of creatures far larger than anything alive today. To these early hunters, every animal they saw must have looked like something out of myth, towering shapes against the snow, shadows moving through the mist. When humans arrived in Europe, they shared valleys with woolly mammoths, cave lions, and woolly rhinoceroses. The walls of caves like Chauvet and Lascaux are still painted with these animals, drawn in ochre and charcoal, not just as art, but as memory, as reverence, perhaps even as a kind of prayer. Some scholars think these paintings were more than decoration. They might have been rituals, quiet pleas for a successful hunt, or for safety when walking among beasts that could kill with one strike. And in North America, it was much the same. The Clovis people, famous for their fluted spear points, spread across the plains, following herds of mammoths and bison, leaving behind kill sites where dozens of bones lie clustered together. Evidence of hunts so carefully planned that entire groups must have worked in perfect coordination. Imagine it. A mammoth spotted across the steppe, the hunters fanning out silently, fires lit in the distance to guide its path, spears raised as the animal is driven into a bog or gully, the ground shaking under its final charge, the air filled with shouts, the thud of spears, the trumpeting cries of the dying beast. And then silence, followed by days of feasting, carving, drying meat, and shaping bones into tools. One mammoth could feed a band of humans for weeks, perhaps months. But it wasn't just about food. These animals shaped human culture. Mammoth bones became the frames of houses, tusks carved into ornaments, hides stretched into shelters. In a way, the mammoth was not just hunted, it was woven into the very fabric of survival. Of course, humans were not merely hunters, they were storytellers, and around Ice Age fires, tales must have been told. stories of bravery, of animals outsmarting men, of spirits living within the beasts. The animals were rivals, but also sacred, respected even as they were pursued. And yet, something shifted. Within a few thousand years of human arrival in new lands, many of the great beasts began to vanish. Was it overhunting? Climate change? Likely both. The warming of the earth shrank the habitats of mammoths, giant sloths, and saber-tooths. But the precision and persistence of human hunters added pressure that many species could not withstand. By the end of the Pleistocene, the giants were mostly gone, leaving only scattered survivors: elephants, bison, rhinos, smaller echoes of what had once been. The last mammoths survived on Wrangel Island until about 2000 BC, meaning that when humans were building the pyramids in Egypt, small herds of shaggy mammoths were still wandering the tundra of Siberia. A strange overlap of two worlds, one ancient, one recognizably modern. And as the giants faded, humans looked back at them with a mixture of memory and myth. For thousands of years after their disappearance, bones and tusks were found, leading to legends of dragons, monsters, and creatures buried by the gods in ancient floods. Even today, the mammoth is more than just an extinct animal. It's a symbol of the lost age of giants. By the time the Ice Age began to loosen its grip, the world was changing faster than it had in hundreds of thousands of years. Glaciers melted back, seas rose, forests crept into what had been open steppe, and the vast grazing lands that once fed mammoths, woolly rhinos, and giant sloths began to vanish. For animals that needed endless grasslands, this was a death sentence written not in days, but in centuries. Slow and relentless, and yet the timing is suspicious, because wherever humans arrived in force, the giants seemed to disappear more quickly. In Australia, the huge marsupials vanished not long after the first people set foot there. In the Americas, mammoths, mastodons, and saber-tooths vanished within a few millennia of human spread. Coincidence or cause? Most scientists believe it was a mix. Climate change may have weakened populations, but humans added the final pressure. Relentless hunting, cutting down forests, altering landscapes with fire. It wasn't one or the other, it was both. Picture the last mammoth herd on Wrangel Island, far off the Siberian coast, cut off by rising seas, isolated. A few hundred animals scratching through snow to reach the frozen grasses. No more great migrations, no more endless herds, just a fragile community shrinking with every generation. And then, around 2000 BC, silence. They were gone. The last echoes of a species that had walked with humans since the very beginning. And with their passing, humans carried forward only stories, bones turned into myths, tusks carved into ornaments, cave paintings fading in the dark. The giants themselves had vanished, but their presence lingered in imagination, in the dragons of Europe, the thunderbirds of the Americas, the elephant-headed gods of Asia, echoes of the real animals that once walked beside us. And maybe that's the real irony. We like to think of ourselves as separate from the wild, but for most of history, humans weren't just observers of nature. We were participants, rivals, predators among predators. The mammoth wasn't a museum piece. It was dinner, shelter, tool, spirit. And when the giants died, part of our own story dimmed with them. So tonight, as you drift deeper into sleep, think of that world, a world where the ground shook with mammoth herds, where saber-tooths prowled under starlight, where giant sloths rustled in forests, and where humans were just one more creature struggling to survive. The giants are gone, but their shadows remain in our myths, in our bones, even in our DNA. The giants are gone, but their shadows remain in our myths, in our bones, even in our DNA. Every culture that came after tried to explain those bones left in the earth. Massive femurs and skulls were not just bones. They were the remains of monsters, dragons, titans. In Greece, shepherds stumbled on mammoth skulls with their cavernous nasal holes and swore they had found the heads of cyclopes, one-eyed giants from legend. In China, dragon bones were dug up and ground into medicine. People thought they were celestial beasts turned to stone, not ice age animals weathered by time. And in medieval Europe, mammoth tusks were hung in churches as relics, called the bones of biblical giants wiped out in the flood. And yet, here we are, thousands of years later, slowly learning that these were not myths at all. They were neighbors. We shared the earth with them. And for tens of thousands of years, our lives were tangled with theirs. Their stories became our stories, because when you live beside something so big, so strange, so alive, you can't help but build them into your imagination. Think of the mammoth, shuffling across frozen tundra, shaggy fur swaying, tusks curved like crescents against the snow. We carved them into ivory figurines, painted them onto cave walls. They were part of our spirit world, part of our daily bread. We saw them as both sacred and ordinary. And when they vanished, something in us shifted too. The giant ground sloths, lumbering through South American forests, claws long as daggers, eating leaves in silence. Imagine seeing that from a distance. A walking boulder with fur, slow but unstoppable. Now gone, remembered only as a rumor in fossilized dung and claw marks carved into caves. The saber-toothed cats, with teeth so long they looked impossible, but they were real, prowling edges of camps, shadows in the night. Our ancestors feared them, fought them, sometimes even wore their teeth as necklaces. And when they vanished, the fear lived on in the stories of demons, devourers, and beasts that stalk dreams. Every extinction leaves behind an echo, not just in the bones, but in the psyche. And maybe that's why we keep inventing monsters. Dragons, giants, creatures of the deep. They are ways of remembering, of filling the silence left when the real giants walked off the stage. And here's the quiet truth. The giants are still with us in another way. If you're of non-African descent, you probably carry fragments of Neanderthal DNA. Few percent of your genome whispering of Ice Age encounters. A trace of another species woven into your story. If you're of Melanesian or Southeast Asian ancestry, you might carry traces of Denisovans, a mysterious cousin we only know from a finger bone and a tooth. Yet their legacy is alive in us, in how we process oxygen at high altitudes, in how our immune systems work. The giants may have gone, but their shadows breathe in us, and so we look back at mammoths and mastodons, giant birds like the moa towering over fields in New Zealand, cave bears hulking through European mountains. They are all gone, yet in the black screen of memory they move still. Shadows under the stars, reminders of a world that once was. Close your eyes. Imagine the long grass of the Pleistocene steppes swaying in a cold wind. Herds stretching to the horizon, predators circling, the crackle of fire at the edge of a human camp, and beyond it, in the night, the sound of something enormous breathing. That was the soundscape of our ancestors, and if you listen closely, maybe you can still hear it. It's humbling, isn't it? To think that the world we know is only the latest chapter, that entire ecosystems lived, thrived, and died before we even began writing words on clay tablets, and all of it is buried beneath our feet, waiting in the dirt. And so tonight, as you drift further into rest, remember the giants. Remember the mammoths, the cats, the sloths, the birds. Remember that they lived, loved, fought, and vanished. And remember that in the quiet of the night, when the mind wanders, they still walk, not in the flesh, but in memory, in myth, in the stories we whisper to each other under dark skies. Sleep now. With the shadows of the giants, let their echoes guide you into dreams, where the earth is still wild, the sky is full of thunder, and mammoths still move across the snow.